and welcome to the Hardest Game. My name's Ben Doughty, and I'm especially delighted to be joined this evening by my old mate, Lewis J Marciano. If anybody doesn't already realise, the whole crux of this appearance is Lewis is the nephew of the incomparably great Rocky Marciano. That means his father was Rocky Marciano's brother. We did an interview many years ago, which I thought was great, but it never really saw the light of day for whatever reason. This encore is long overdue, Lewis, and I'm delighted to see you.
Likewise, Ben. Likewise.
So, first of all, let's start with the fact. I mean, I say that your father was Rocky's brother, one of his brothers. That he had two. What I didn't realise, because I just automatically assumed with Rocky, I know he passed young at the age of 46 in the plane crash in 1969, but I just automatically assumed that anybody of that generation would sadly be no longer with us. And I've just understood properly that your father passed away literally just last week at the age of 91.
That's correct. Yes. No, it's understandable. We all kind of, think of people in right from that era so long ago. So it's understood that one might assume that. But yeah, he we got to have him for a long time, 91 year. He at the age of 91. But like everybody, I don't want to sound like this is exclusive to me. When it's your parents, it's never enough time,
Never a good
But
time, no.
and part of that is that we don't want to think about carrying on without them, and it kind of speaks to our own mortality. There's a comfort level, and it just seems right now really strange that he left.
John Doyle, who's a very good boxing man who lives in London, for a good friend of mine, says Lewis has a strong facial resemblance to Rocky. Do people say that?
Yeah, I do get that. There's a funny anecdote, at the various boxing banquets, and I know you attend many. I don't attend many anymore, but in the old days when I was attending, and I was on the dais, lucky enough, just because I'm the nephew, and Vito Anafirmo was behind me, and he was staring at me, and I says, Vito, what's wrong? And he says, Man, he says, I was just at a banquet in Boston. He says, you Marcianos all look the same. And
Yeah.
so there's a Marciano, there's a Colombo family, and there is a strong resemblance. As a matter of fact, I could be walking somewhere in Massachusetts. I could be on the Cape in Hyannis, and I'll be walking down Main Street, and somebody would yell out the car, and I might not even have known them. But yeah, I guess we do have a resemblance.
It's funny you say that I go to some of these banquets and stuff, and I know we've had many exchanges on Facebook over the years, and a lot of the people I really respect in the boxing loop are people who don't always agree with me, and they're not afraid to tell me when they think I'm out of order or whatever. And you've certainly been one of them because I know you're not a schmoozer like me. I mean, I will pose with all these fighters and be like, here I am with Duran, and you've made a point saying I'm not into that. I'm not into that cult of celebrity. Right?
I like the way you do it though. I like the way you do it because you have a keen interest and a vast knowledge in the sport. And for you, I have the perception that it's your passion for boxing, where there's some that do it and it's almost like celebrity chasing. So I
Oh,
think it's
Lewis, yeah, trust me. Any Donald Trump could walk past and I wouldn't get a picture with him unless I was like, this is the guy that promoted Tyson Spinks, y'all. That's the only reason it would mean anything to me. Madonna, well, no, I would probably would get one with Madonna to be honest, but generally, a lot of important people could walk past and it wouldn't be important to me at all. You're right.
Yeah, it's I think it's the way you do it, the way you go about it, and you're 100% a boxing man, and and you, like I say, you have such a keen knowledge, and and there are a lot on Facebook. There's a lot of guys, boxing. I don't know if you'd agree, but boxing fans are some of the most knowledgeable. I mean, there's a lot that aren't,
Yeah,
and
yeah, the casual. We call them the casuals.
I know the casuals, but no, you do it right. You present it right, and when you're pictured there, it looks like you should be next to him.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, Rocky one of the remarkable things about him of many is he didn't start boxing until his 20s, right? I mean, apparently not.
He didn't. Listen, he was always rugged on the street, but he didn't really formally start to train seriously until about 1948. So
Yeah,
even when he was in the amateurs, he wasn't fully committed because there's three sons. There's Rocky, my father, Louis, Sonny, and then there's Peter. And all three of them really liked baseball. And they all played some level of professional baseball. And Rocky was really pursuing that dream. And it wasn't until I think it was 1946 or 7, I got to look, where he was cut from the Chicago Cubs system,
yeah,
that he was dabbling in boxing, he was dabbling in the military, and he was getting into some street fights, and he was winning. But that was purely, no amateur pedigree. And he was fighting in the amateurs. And like I say, once he got cut from the Chicago Cubs and he realized that there was no chance for boxing, my father, we make fun because my father takes credit. He really doesn't. But a true story, they're walking to a sparring session, and they get there to Boston. They got to ride part of the way walking. They still love to walk because they looked at that as training. And Rocky got in there. He was not really in boxing shape. He had just gotten cut by the Cubs, and he looked terrible in this sparring session. And my father's 10 years junior. So at the time, my father's probably about 13. And they're walking back. And my father says, Rocky, you look terrible. And he probably threw in a couple other words. You look terrible. And Rocky said, this boxing game, if I'm going to go at it, I'm going to be in tremendous shape. At that point, he was not. And he said it was at that moment because he knew now baseball was gone, and he had a fear just to not make it. He thought he had greatness within. He had a fear to just be ordinary and just to work a menial job. And so
yeah.
it was at that moment the light went off, and he said he knew that he needed to be in terrific shape. And what he wanted to, he was in pursuit of a long distance runner's euphoric stamina. That's what he wanted because he knew with his style, even though at that time he didn't have a formalized style, but he knew that that was going to be what he needed to do. But he had a long way to go, no amateur pedigree. And to be quite honest, his early professional career was his amateur training. And
There's a confusion over that, isn't there? Because I mean, people say most commonly his record is given as 8-4 in the amateurs. But people say, and you must be sick of hearing this, because the people who like to try and tear down the legend a little bit for whatever
right,
reason, they will jump on this. But they'll say he lost, then went back to the amateurs. Well, what I think happened, but you would know much more than I would, that I believe he turned pro and had one bout under the name of Rocky Mack, and then he went back to the amateurs and had a couple, two or three, whatever, lost one, I think maybe to Corey Wallace, and then he went pro again. So he never lost, and it's the same record with a little gap with the amateur fights in between. He never lost a pro fight in his life, all 49 of them. But yes, he did lose an amateur fight in between. True?
He was fighting under Rocky Mack, but Coley Wallace, he fought under the name Rocco Marchigiano, his official real name. There's conflicting views on who won, but there's many that say that Rocky won on volume and on
Yeah,
tenacity. Coley Wallace was a highly pedigreed, as you know, amateur fighter. He went on to play Joe Louis in a movie. He
he did.
never
Yeah,
he never transitioned and had success as a pro,
yeah.
but he was a heck of an amateur fighter. But that was the case. But again, because Rocky had such little training, even in his amateur career, what we need to bring out is that he didn't have formal training. He really had no formal training to speak of. So he had a lot to catch up to. It's still remarkable that he could do what he did with starting so late.
Angelo Dundee tells a story in his book. I think it's called My View from the Corner. and he says that he was the Golden Gloves one time. It must have been in the late 40s, I guess. And he said they had this guy that was squat and, short armed. And one of the other trainers said, "Listen, can you please just show this guy the 1-2 for Christ's sake? He's about to box." And they're saying he's really not ready. But whoever was responsible for cornering him says, "Angie, could you at least show him how to go like, bah, ah." And he was trying to show him, and he said he didn't have balance, but he had power. And whatever, he didn't hold out too much hope. But I think Rocky stopped his opponent just with this germ of an idea that Dundee had given him like minutes before the bout. I know people represent things in a certain way in
Well,
literature.
that no, that's a fair assessment. And what Angelo said that day, and Angie might have kind of borrowed it a little bit from Charley Goldman, who was there at Stillman's, and he said something to the effect that, man, that guy don't he looks all wrong. He's not built like a boxer. He's squat, and he doesn't, like you say, have a 1-2. And Charley Goldman says, you're right, but he says when he hits the other guy don't look so good on the canvas,
Yeah.
And so I think what they felt is that when Rocky hit a guy, he fell a certain way, and Rocky had a certain effect on him. He was heavy-handed. That it was against most of their better judgment, but because by the way Rocky looked and didn't look as far as in the ring, but I think the effect and the heavy-handedness. I think they said, we're going to work with this guy a little bit. And going back to the amateur days in Coley Wallace, there was a fighter, a very pedigreed amateur. I want to say Bob Gerard, and Bob Gerard beat Rocky in the amateurs. And he says, "Let me tell you something. There's 400 guys that can beat Rocky in 3 rounds." He said, "Not one of us is going to get him in 15.
Yeah.
Impossible."
It's a
And
different animal.
he said even at that time, and he said when Rocky hit me, he said I literally froze up, I locked up, and I saw stars, and it was a different type of feel. Some guys, as you know, are heavy-handed. Juan Roldan, other guys just have heavy hands. Obviously, Foreman, thudding, and some guys have a certain effect when they do damage. Rocky had that. I posted the picture, and I put the
Joe
caption,
Lewis.
yeah, the grimace. And Rocky, if you look at the grimaces of Joe Lewis, of Ezra Charles, of Jersey Joe Walcott, of Lee Savold, of Keen Simmons, Rocky had an effect. And Archie Moore would spoke of it. And so, we have so many haters on Facebook. I guess we shouldn't acknowledge them, but they're vicious in their attacks. They're relentless, and they put energy into discounting, into marginalizing, to disparaging Rocky. But I say to them, I say, how how concrete can your position be when all of the greatest from Dempsey said it takes me a couple shots, and he said, and when I hit them they get back up. When Rocky does it, sometimes he can do it in one, but and they don't get up, and Archie Moore was the only guy that went on to have success after fighting Rocky, so there was an effect.
He was
And
like a soul taker. I mean, because
thank you, perfectly
look at the
said.
way Walcott and Charles performed in their rematches. I mean, Walcott obviously very disappointing, having given him a good tussle in the first Rocky's title-winning effort in 1952. Charles gave him an epic battle the first time too, but they said he was skittering around the ring and seeming a bit fearful and reluctant to fight in the rematch. Charles, even though he ripped
um
Rocky's nose.
I thought, I've watched it. I think Charles was just maybe being a little more cautious. Walcott, we know, Rocky said after the fight, geez, the crowd was disappointed. Walcott was, and most of all, I was disappointed because Rocky wanted another
To
fight.
fight.
But the Charles fight that's interesting, and people don't realize the adversity, is that Charles cuts Rocky, and Charles was I highly doubt it was intentional, but it's most likely that it was an elbow or something. I doubt it was a punch. We didn't have HGTV, so it's
Yeah.
tough to see. But the thing about that fight is that Rocky comes back, and I think it's round 7. And Rocky rarely asked, what's going on. But this time he knew something was different because he was split open. And they tell him in the corner, it's just another nosebleed. Don't worry. And Rocky say, so he goes out and it's wide open. They can't stop the bleeding. How can you, next to sewing it up? Freddie Brown, the great Freddie Brown, can't do nothing with that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they're fighting, and the blood's coming out, and then between rounds, I always forget if it was Al Burrell comes up and says, the referee, he says, guys, because it's Rocky, I'll give you one more, but that's all he's got. I'm gonna have to
yeah.
stop it. So now they got a level with Rocky. The corner has to level with him, Charley Goldman, and they say you're split wide open, and you got to go get him. And they don't use the term clutch often in boxing, but it's clutch because Charles is not broken down at this point. He's not yet broken down. He's not ready to go. And Rocky has to go get him out. And if you watch the sequence of punches, it's tremendously athletic what Rocky accomplishes. And that's why the folklore and the talking points, he's not athletic. You know, going back to Dundee, those comments at that point, he was not. But man, he learned, and he had athleticism. He just needed to learn how to convert that athleticism into boxing. And he goes out and he takes Charles when Charles is not ready to go. And Charles, as you know, was not an easy guy to get. So and he saves his championship. He saves his unbeaten streak. He goes out and gets it when he really has to go out and get it. He rises up to the challenge. He looks adversity in the eye, and he goes and he gets it. And it's not easy against an all-time great like Charles. I don't have to tell you.
Well, it's funny with Charles because most boxing aficionados would regard Ezra Charles as the greater fighter, pound for pound, than Rocky Marciano. Insofar as some boxing hipsters, not the casuals, will tell you that he's a candidate for numero uno. Some people will say, look at his resume and what he did for the weight divisions. Ezra Charles is actually the greatest fighter of all time. And you know what? Joey Maxim said he was better than Robinson. He fought both. Whereas
Ooh.
nobody is likely to, yeah, apparently so. Whereas no one is likely to say that about Rocky Marciano nowadays. But how do you feel about that? Because you often say you guys seem to want an imperfect guy to worship when a perfect season and an entire career seems to actually be marked down somehow. That's been your bugbear.
Well, let me take what you first said. On it from a technical, from a classical point of view. You're right. Charles, and I use the word boxer, but then I'll use the word fighter. There's no doubt you can't dispute that guys, pound for pound, Charles. Even Joe Louis, the fluidity of the combinations, the effort,
Yeah,
fluidity. Those are on another level, and that wasn't Rocky's business model. That was not Rocky's business model. And so, yes, those guys are ahead of him from that standpoint. I agree. If when you're opinionated, you should try to be fair. That way, you don't look like a hypocrite, and you have credibility. So I agree with that. But my opinion is in totality, the sport of boxing is this. If I said to Ben, if I said to him, if your life depended, and it's a precarious position. If your life depended on a victory, who do you want to get in the ring? Now, this isn't stylistically, that doesn't matter. You need the win. Who are you going to put your life under their
in the hands
shell?
of, yeah, yeah,
And so that's when we boil it down. I'm not saying anything nobody doesn't know. To its lowest common denominator, it's fighting, and it's who's going to win. But so there's many that, from a boxing perspective, are rank ahead of Rocky. I just think in fighting, from the gladiator definition, I just think Rocky's at the top. Now of course it's colored with some bias, but
yeah.
that's the way I see it. What was the other thing you were saying? So I have a saying. Hopefully, I don't forget to speak to what you say. And I say, in where in life is winning most of the time better than winning all of the time? There's nowhere else in life. Gambling, if you're a gambler, um,
Yeah.
you know, But it's only in
The only
boxing.
thing that you could possibly argue is the slow cycle race. You know that one where you've actually got
So,
to go slow.
well,
Do you not have that in America?
well, I mean, we might, but I'm not aware of it. But I'll take your word for it.
It's a
But
kids thing. It's the slow cycle race, and you lose when you get ahead. So you've got to go slow without falling off the bike. You've got to balance, but you've got to go real slow.
well, if there's an obscure exception to the rule, I'll defer to that. But most of the time, believe me, Bill Parcells, an American footballer, he makes a statement. He says, "Listen, you are what your record says you are. Only in boxing do guys get creative and find a way to try to underestimate and devalue an
Unbeaten.
undefeated."
But what
Yeah.
about Floyd Mayweather? I'm sure you have your critiques of him.
Well, you know something, I'm going to be honest. I stopped following boxing with the passion that I once had, and so I'm not 100% knowledgeable like I am on other fighters of earlier generations. But here's my critique. It's easy for me to critique Floyd if I bring emotion because he's knocked my uncle, him and his uncle
Yeah.
Roger. I think he passed. But
Yes.
what I say is you can't deny what Mayweather what he did throughout his career, and it's great to win them all is great. I will say that I'll say two things. He hasn't beat my uncle's record because until you're a heavyweight, it's a different record. So in my mind, when people make that direct analogy, it's incorrect. It's a misnomer. Rocky, all these years later, 70, what is it, something years later after 1956, is still the only undefeated heavyweight champ of the world. So, and then I say this: the way Rocky's version, his variety of undefeated, is of dominance. Floyd's is of non-engagement, and so I like Rocky's dominance and his brand. But Mayweather's and likewise to the kid from Wales,
Joe Kazagi.
Calzaghe. They're tremendous fighters, both of them. And let me tell you something: if somebody else could have done what they did, they would have done it. No one
Would have done it.
loses on purpose,
No.
and
Unless
it's
unless Jake LaMotta versus Billy Fox,
well,
etc. But
Billy
that's another
Fox, the
story.
Billy Fox fight. Yeah, yeah.
But
That
Joe has just said Rocky was in training for Johansson and decided he didn't have it anymore. He said that would have been a nice number 50. I'm sure
so
you could expand upon that.
so let me speak to this. Rocky's business model was, yes, he lingered in the amateurs without commitment, but he knew that was not the path to success. Once he committed that day with walking back with my father, I'm going for this 100% because my baseball dream is dead. Now this is going to be a different Rocky Marciano. I'm committed. So that he was obsessive. He was obsessive with his training, and so he went back into training. He didn't tell anyone because he didn't know if it was going to come to fruition. So he was very private, secretive. He went back into training, but I'll tell you this: he knew before he went back into training that it wouldn't be there. But he just had to confirm what he intellectually understood. He had to confirm that physically because Rocky loved money as a lot of people do,
They
and
say that.
he didn't want to leave money on the table. So he went into training, but consciously, subconsciously, he knew it wasn't going to be there. And here's what he said: when I went in the gym, and the odor of the gym got to me, because as being a boxer, as bad as that damn place smelled when you're in your career, it's kind of like, I don't know, like some of us like the smell of asphalt, black tar asphalt,
Yeah,
and for the streets, like I
yeah,
love that smell. Some of us love that smell. To others,
yeah.
it's
It couldn't be
grotesque.
described as pleasant as such, but you have a love for it.
Yes, and so Rocky got in there, and that bothered him, and the zeal wasn't there. I still think he beats Johansson, but whether
Regardless.
but that Rocky set a standard, He had a business model. He set a standard. Every fight was his Olympic Games once he turned pro. Every fight, it was a different approach. And he knew it wasn't there to the standard of Rocky Marciano. And so he said no, and he walked away from the money, you know?
What when you talk about his dedication and training, tell me this too, Lewis. You say something interesting. When people mention Rocky's lack of size, you contend he trained himself down to an unnaturally light weight because he believed he was most effective and efficient at it. And when you compared once him on a chat show with Floyd Patterson, and you said, look at Rocky as a bigger man in every physical metric, really, than Floyd Patterson. But Rocky trained down to a weight that it was actually pretty hard for him to get down to. That's true, right?
So in that picture, in my opinion, and he looks like a power lifter, and all he's doing there is he's just eating what he wants to eat, and he hasn't been retired for too many years, so he hasn't put on fat. He's put on all muscle, and he looks quite large. So my father used to say, "Geez, at training camp, I saw him sometimes, and I thought he was too thin." Recently, I wanted to lose a bunch of weight, and I lost muscle, and a friend of mine who might be watching now, Wayne DeFelice, he saw me, and he was a dear friend of my father, and he looked at me and he says, "You're too thin, you look
Yeah,
gaunt." And
yeah.
so Rocky would train down, and my father thought he was too thin, too light. But Rocky could have easily walked around at 205, 210 easily and not looked fat. He just would have looked fuller. He would have looked fuller and just more muscular. But he did not, he knew he wanted that euphoria of never being tired. And so that he wanted to be able to throw volume for 15 rounds. And he felt if he was heavier, he would compromise, he would impede that situation. But so he even gave up power because you have to give up because you're just stronger when you're heavier.
Yeah.
So
What was
that's
his
true.
road work routine in camp?
Well, I think some guys exaggerate it, but I think I think it was easily 8, 10 miles. Sometimes he would break it up to two times in the day. But it was every bit that. Sometimes it was hills, running up and down, picking up things as he's running, throwing, mixing in different strength training. And he even did it sometimes on vacation. And between fights, he didn't allow himself to get very, very far removed from some type of, training. And he didn't go crazy with the food either because he could eat like, no end. But
Yeah.
yeah,
What was his diet like in camp?
oh no, at camp it was very disciplined. It was
Steaks?
steaks and a lot of times I don't know. I forget if he got it from Archie Moore who did
Oh,
it, but it was chewing. Someone said he did it. Did it for taste. Well, he didn't just do it for taste. He did it to get the minerals. But he spit a lot of a
meat.
lot of the
Chew.
membrane, the actual
Molars.
meat out. Yeah, and my grandfather, his father, would cook different soups and different vegetables, broccoli rabe, and certain mustard chard and different things for him. And there's a story that Rocky knew he needed Al Well, but he didn't like Al Well. And So Al Well told Pa, we called him Pa. He says, what are you doing here in the kitchen? And Rocky bit his tongue on Al, because again, he knew he needed him. But when he came to his father, he told him, he says, "Don't you ever tell my father." Al Well says, "We have a chef, we have a cook." When they were up at Greenwood Lake or Grossingers, and Rocky told him, "Don't you ever question my father. He's here. He'll cook whatever I want him to cook."
For anybody who doesn't already know, Al Well was Rocky's manager, and there was no love lost between them, right?
No, Charley Goldman was
The
just an
trainer.
affable, lovable figure. So not only was he teaching Rocky valuable lessons, and obviously he was doing it in a very intelligent manner. He wasn't trying to make this guy a stand-up classic fighter. He said, let's take his unusual and you could say
Assets.
awkward movements, mannerisms, and let's use them to his advantage because Al Wells saw that when Rocky got in a crouch, he was making guys miss. And he liked that when Rocky was in the crouch, like somewhat like Jack Dempsey, but more sophisticated and improved, that power comes up. Power doesn't come down, it comes up in explosiveness, and that he saw Rocky was explosive. So he saw that he was defensively in a safer zone when he was low, and that when he came up, he was coming up with explosive power. And so Charlie uh, moved Rocky in the direction of his own style, and he taught him that way. And it was a brilliant. Some trainers want to, they want to be the artist and they want to mold the clay, and it becomes about them. Charlie was, as you know, he had so many fights. He started fighting. He knew
Like
the game.
800,
Huh?
maybe.
Huh? I forget. I've looked, and it was an incredible amount. And he knew boxing, and he liked Rocky because Rocky never gave him any problems, disciplinary wise. So he loved Rocky. A matter of fact, he used to tell Rocky, "That's enough today." And Rocky wants to keep going, more rounds on the heavy bag, more rounds of sparring. And so Charlie appreciated that. And I always say that Charlie made it possible as a buffer between Rocky and Al Wow. He made it possible for Rocky to put up with Al Wow.
Yeah. Well, he was just locked into a contract with Elwell, and that was that, right?
He he
Or he needed
was
him for
he
connections.
Well, yes, but he was as everyone was in the entertainment business. So when we go to Motown, and I laugh at the fans, oh, they don't realize that if you brought legal representation to a meeting in any sport, in any brand of entertainment,
Back then.
they'd say there's no meeting. No, they wouldn't take you. So you were only going to have, um, he was locked in, but he knew that he needed to be there because Al had the connections. And let's face it, Al could strategically place his career on the way up. There's no shame in that. If some of the haters try to talk about that, but that's just the smart thing to
Well,
do.
they say he was mobbed up. They say that he was an overrated guy. This is the haters, like you say, the unknowledgeable. Like a basically guy that was canonized into a position that he'd have never got to otherwise because he was mobbed up. I mean,
So let's talk about the mob. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to get plugged in from my battery. Let's talk about the mob. They
oh,
um, what did I do? So yes, the mob controlled. They controlled boxing. They controlled the entertainment industry. So you weren't going to be the comedy industry. They own the nightclubs. So you weren't going to be in those brands of entertainment. If you weren't, if those guys weren't around. But
yeah.
Frankie Carbo had a percentage. There's no doubt. But here's the thing, the way that Rocky carried himself and comported himself, and Carbo knew to never ask Rocky to do anything because it wasn't going to happen. And Rocky did have a lot of pride. He knew he represented, Italian
Italian
American.
Americans.
He was an American and he was an Italian American, and he was loyal to both of those above his ethnicity and his nationality. And we know that in the turn of the century, Italians were not collectively well thought of.
Yeah.
And so Rocky felt the responsibility, and he felt the responsibility to his family because his mother was the driving force. And she was an educated woman. She was a school teacher in her country. Even though, when she came here, she spoke, her English was of a dialect, cute dialect, but she was a smart woman, and she was a disciplinarian. And so he respected that to no level. and he carried himself in a certain way that they knew not to approach. And even Carbo understood what was going on. It was different than a LaMotta and a Graziano. They were in trouble from young kids on the street. They kind of lived a rough and tumble life. Rocky came from a disciplined family unit, and so it was different in that way. And there was no one was going to come to him to throw a fight. He just wasn't going to do it.
Yeah,
He,
and Robinson, they couldn't get into Ray Robinson famously either, and they just accepted it. It would seem Carbo said, "Robinson, you're a great fighter. If only someone could talk to you, you know."
right.
But
Oh,
but
if
they
only,
understood for
yeah.
whatever reason they couldn't lean on
Well,
Robinson.
true, but I mean, you'd have to be half a dummy to not understand. The guy was too great. He's too great to play games. You can't
Yeah,
ask a man. You can't ask a man of that level. It won't. First of all, it won't even look real if he's faking it and he's throwing a fight. He's too.
yeah. John Doyle just said you don't get half your face caved in like a lot of opponents did, and then take a dive. You just take one.
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
John's right on. He's right on target there. Exactly. Because
yeah.
Rocky's opponents either went early in the first round or early in the fight, or they stayed around and they got the breakdown, brutalization, and nobody signs up, as John says. You don't sign up for that.
No. But I suppose it's inevitable. People would make those kind of because I'll be honest, I used to be a bit of a Rocky denier because I was younger and full of ego, and a lot of it, to me, it was like a direct battle when I was growing up between Rocky and Muhammad Ali, because when I was like 11 years old and on through my teenage years. Jay, you
Yes.
okay there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just plugging in. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm listening.
Okay, no, I was just checking you're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was like it was almost like you had to be for Muhammad Ali in terms of he was the greatest heavyweight, or some of the older generations said that Rocky Marciano was. Obviously, you had Joe Louis in the mix as well. But to me,
I,
because of that computer
yeah.
fight as well, to me, my worship for Muhammad Ali and my sense of identification with that style, it meant that I choose to take an anti-Marciano position because I felt like I was representing Ali by doing that. Obviously, when you grow up and you learn a bit more, you realise that wasn't the best, that wasn't the most balanced view to take in a
let,
situation.
let,
I've
let,
got
let,
so much
let,
respect for Rocky now.
let me say that I think that is just that's us maturing, because I had a similar I had the same thing, but I wasn't
Other way
intellectually.
around.
I wasn't in. Yes, well, yeah, I wasn't intellectually sophisticated enough, and it's also about, when we're not mature, we're not secure in who we are yet. And this kind of is
Yeah,
getting this is going to get into the human condition, but I have a great interest in this area. But we're not secure with who we are, and so when it's who we like, when it's the alternative to what we like, and in my case, my family, we feel we need to take the position that, like you said, that's
attack it.
totally, yeah. And so I was there too, but as you get older, and Rocky, because there was such a different generational thing, and because Ali was 100 years ahead of his time.
Yeah,
Rocky, they asked him one time, well, what did you think of Ali? And he says, well, I thought when he came out, he was good for boxing. He says, but as we went along, he started talking too much. Rocky said
yeah.
he started bringing in the religion. And Rocky said, and I don't think that's been good for boxing. And listen, I understand what Rocky's saying, but in retrospect, with the benefit of hindsight,
Yeah,
I think if Rocky would have lived longer, he would have got it. He
yeah,
would have said,
definitely.
I get it now. So sometimes I tell people in business, it's not always wrong and right. Sometimes it's their position and it's our position. You
And
know what I mean?
zeitgeist, the zeitgeist of a particular time as well.
Yeah, yeah. But no, that's understandable. I think, and I think it's understandable for guys to think about Rocky, the mob thing. It may be to think that it was kind of dumb luck, and because Graziano and LaMotta and the cartoon image that we have of an Italian fighter, D's, Dems, and Does. But Rocky try to, not that he was trying to act like he was a Rhodes Scholar, but he understood that he was not formally educated. And for the things I told you about his parents not wanting to disappoint his family members, his siblings, his Italian heritage, his American heritage, he was aware, he was cognizant of trying to present a little better, clean up. He used to carry dictionaries around. He tried to articulate and be well. He tried to be well thought out, and
Yeah.
so he thought about the way he presented.
He was almost like that perfect representation. I once heard him described as the perfect post-war champion and symbol of his age who never put a foot wrong because he was when that World Heavyweight Championship was the real Mr. America title. Not that
Yeah.
Americans couldn't win it in theory, but you know what I mean. Give or take Cornero or Johansson, it was Mr. America spot, and it was
Yep.
such an important office, a bit somewhat akin to being the president of the United States. And some people would even make the distinction that the president is still only the president of the United States and not the entire world. And Rocky was almost like one of those perfect ambassadors for that era or any era, really, wasn't he? The image of the strongest man in the world with the two kids on each bicep and the Grossingers t-shirt. Things have got really skewed and complex since then, haven't they? In terms of
Yes, I'm
history.
gonna, yeah, I'm gonna say you're 100%, and I'm gonna add some authenticity to it because I'm gonna be frank. Is that when my grandmother, and we only have one of the sisters is remaining, but with the family was very protective, and that's human nature, and sometimes you're protective to a degree that and the writers of that era, if they liked you, they also were protective. And so sometimes you're reluctant to kind of carve away at the covering. But the truth of the matter is that Rocky, there's a term, control your narrative, your image. And Rocky was doing that before the term was out. Not that he was phony, but he was
Chaos
careful.
heavy
He
ahead
was
of the
careful. Yeah.
concept.
Yes,
Yeah,
and he was far from perfect. He tried to be noble. He was brave. He definitely tried to be noble. I think the way he carried himself in the ring, it's easy for me to be proud because he really, in my estimation, had a swashbuckling style. He never looked to the referee. He never complained. He kind of just went at it. He was rough and tumble. Sometimes you got to do things in there, but he was very good at doing it, not making it look too bad. But he wasn't perfect. But in those days, listen, kings, queens, gangsters, politicians, they all hung in the same circles. So
yeah.
Rocky was able to do that, but not get dirty himself. So he had fun. He was a knockaround guy, like most Hollywood stars and even politicians. There was an allure to sometimes be in the company of certain people, because there's a sense of danger, there's a sense of living on the edge. He was all about that, but he tempered it with not getting too deep in the woods, not getting entangled to a degree that would kind of bring shame to the name. So he definitely negotiated and navigated that type of an existence where wanting to have fun. He was sought out by those guys, the mob guys. They loved to be in his company, and
Yeah.
he enjoyed to be in their company to a degree, but again, he was pretty smart. And again, in those days, the media, if they liked you, they weren't all
Left
the
you
way
alone.
up. They weren't up your backside the way they are today. So
Yeah.
he had help in that department, and so yeah, definitely it was a different
So
time.
you're saying Rocky let his hair down sometimes and maybe sowed some wild oats.
Although there's no doubt he did. Listen, I again, years ago we kept it under,
Yeah.
but listen, most, to generalize, I'm generalizing, but most powerful men are driven and they're imperfect animals. when men that are in business, politics, whatever, the top of the game, when they're at the top of the food chain, they're driven. You hear about it. They on retrospect, they say, geez, I wasn't home a lot for the family because I was in the office and I became the CEO of a major corporation. Those guys are driven. They're of a different ilk. And
Yeah.
so they're gonna be imperfect, and many times they're obsessive. They're obsessive because how else would they achieve that
What they
type of
did, yeah.
success?
And
And
plus the
so
fact that if you're talking about fidelity and stuff like that, a lot of guys, regardless of how people want to dress it up, it sometimes comes along to opportunity. And when you have an absurd amount of opportunity, somebody is perhaps less faithful and fidelity minded than they would be just living in the regular world like a regular Joe.
that's exactly what I'm getting at. And I guess it depends how you look at it. I'm a guy, and I'm not afraid to say it. I don't look at that, as being a criminal. Some people do,
Yeah.
but be careful how you judge, because unless you're not sinning, don't throw the first stone. I'm not appalled because see, I'm a realist. And I've been around, different people, and I understand it's like you said, it's intoxicating. People are intoxicated by you, and that's part of it. And
Yeah.
so I don't look at that as, it's,
Joe Lewis was the same. He would style it's like Mae West he had flings with, and women threw themselves at him. But like you said, the press kept a respectful distance back then.
let me
Muhammad Ali obviously was in a similar situation a lot of the time, because he was Ali.
yeah, well, sure. And that's the danger in, you know getting morality too high into it, because too many try to say, with Ali, with the religious thing. Listen, let's just say this. In my opinion, those who don't take advantages of opportunity that ascend to a high position in life are probably the exception. But
Yeah.
so I don't know why people get so hung up in that. I don't go into other people's private quarters. That's the opportunity, like you said, is there. And it
Yeah.
is what it is.
I knew somebody would mention this, so I was going to mention it anyway at some point. Joe says, didn't Rocky bury his money? And supposedly some of it hasn't been found. What about this legend of Rocky's lost millions
So I'm going to
or
tell
buried
you,
millions?
I'm going to give you some insight on that.
Go on.
Rocky, listen,
Just coordinates
Rocky.
will do, Lewis. Just coordinates and a map will do.
um, yeah, right. So my father was asked one time, and I thought his answer was so nonchalant. It was on one of the documentaries. I forget which one. And they asked him, and he smirks and he says, no, he says, we're not looking for his money. Um, but the truth of the matter is that Rocky did have some funny ways. I like to tell people my issues have issues. Rocky,
Yeah.
being going through the depression, he wasn't crazy about banks, and he loved cash. And there was a friend he had, and in New York, if you Google it, you'll see Castro convertibles, Bernie
Yeah.
Castro, and he was quite well known over here, stateside, for these furnitures. They were like convertibles, that recliners, and he did
Yeah.
very well. And he was friends with Rocky, and he showed Rocky that he had bomb shelters that he built in Florida. And Rocky said, "Man, that's and Bernie says it's a great place to keep money." And Rocky loved it. He loved it. And the story is that he had money there, and he had money at a lot of other places, a lot of handshakes, money in this business, silent partner. He had all kind of things going. So it is true. Did my father go knock on a few doors? He did. And of course, no one was forthcoming. but after a little work and a little, contact, he basically said, "That's what my brother did. My brother never thought he was going to leave the earth. You have to feel you're invincible when you ascend to heavyweight champion. When you're the
Yeah,
top athlete, you have that invincible, streak going through you. So he did have money in
in the ground. Yeah,
places.
yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt he did. Yep.
And we don't know where it is today, and no one's ever going to know.
No, I mean we certainly would have went to get it. I'm going to tell you a funny story. Not too long ago, my stepmother found deeds to property in Florida with my father's name on it, and but it was too many years had gone by, that the taxes weren't paid. But Rocky didn't tell him that they were there, and so Rocky did a lot of things. So there was definitely money around. Rocky had
And
money
property, yeah.
around, and unfortunately, he didn't secure it properly, as he should have. So there's no
I'm
doubt.
wondering, Lewis, are you able to turn a light on in that room? It might need
Oh
you
yeah,
lighting up a bit better as it gets a
yeah,
little darker, as the day gets a bit later in the States on the East Coast.
yes.
See how that is.
Is that any better?
It's a lot better.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's-
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just it was getting darker just as the sun starts to set on the. I'm thinking, what is it? It's like getting on for 5 p.m. on the East Coast there. You're in Bristol. You're in Bristol. Where? Bristol.
Bristol, Connecticut. I'm the home of ESPN. ESPN.
Oh,
That's where their corporate
of course.
headquarters. Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I went to Connecticut, I think at least once, and I think it was when I was living in New York in 2001. I had a removals job, and it was based in the Bronx, the firm, but we used to drive here and there doing moving jobs. And I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure it took me to Connecticut at least one time, at least once.
Sure. Sure.
But what I want to talk about, you know what? You mentioned Stillman's gym at the start of the show. I'm really interested in Stillman's gym and the whole mythology of it, and Lou Stillman and Whitey Bimstein. What do you did Rocky train there before it became a camp type affair, like a Grossingers type affair? Was he boxing at Stillman's in the early days before he could have a camp?
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. Definitely. Yes, he was there before he was at camp. Definitely. Yeah. That's where he was.
And I believe I think it was Lou Stillman used to get on the microphone. There was like a balcony up near the office, and he would get on the microphone and be like a bit of a commentator on the sparring. That people would pay $1 or whatever they paid. Might have even been a quarter back then, to watch the sparring at lunchtime. People who lived and worked in the neighbourhood,
I
and
I
Stillman would be with like a carnival barker at the balcony, I believe.
That's the word I was going to use, and that's what I heard, and that had to be quite a scene because it had to bring a different level of excitement to sparring, and I'm sure it kind of motivated the sparring to a different level, because as you know, a lot of times sparring is just work, and it's not two guys totally going at it. But if you had somebody commentating and stirring up, I guess today they call it a hype man, then that might change the dynamic of the workout.
Absolutely. And I heard that Lou Stillman he wouldn't open the window and he wouldn't clean the place up because he said the golden age of prize fighting was bad sanitation, bad food, and bad ventilation and everything else. And he said he thought the fighters would get soft if he opened windows and aired the place out or cleaned anything up. So he let it get dirty and sleazy as hell and
I
stay
I
that
was
way.
never I was never in a boxing gym where the windows were open and the heat wasn't turned up high. That
Yeah.
was just what they are today are boxing boutiques,
Yeah.
and they're totally different. I don't remember ever paying fees at any of the gyms that I went to, Petronellis,
Yeah.
any of them. I don't even remember if I paid. If I did, it was very nominal. And again,
It
there was
wasn't a
no
commercial
window.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, and there was, the windows were, if there were any windows at all, they weren't open and the heat was turned up. And I don't remember seeing too much cleaning going on either. So,
I want to talk about the Petronellis gym and your relationship with the Petronellis and Marvin Hagler, but John Doyle has just quickly asked, was Grossingers a luxury hotel in the Catskills popular with Jewish customers from New York?
100%, yes. How luxurious was it? I wouldn't say it was 5 star, but it was definitely considered. I think they called it
Upscale.
the Jewish Alps. It was upscale,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what it was. And Rocky really adored Jenny Grossinger. She was very hospitable. He adored her, and he loved going up there because Rocky, as you know, he kind of cut off contact with the world. I
Yeah.
mean, he allowed some visitors as it got closer to the fight time. No mail, no phone calls from home, and he didn't want to meet any new people. Didn't want to shake hands, and kind of, definitely, or not kind of, but got into the zone.
Is it still there today, or is it something else today, Grossingers?
You know something? I believe it's still there, but it's not. It's not. No, it's not open. It's
No.
not open. I've got to
We
go up
spoke
there.
about this concept, didn't we, of the Rocky Marciano tour that we could maybe join forces on. I mean, I need
Yeah,
you to do it, and you need me to do it. It can't happen
yeah,
with one without the other. But that's definitely something we'll talk about after this. Subsequent.
yeah. A matter of fact,
Subsequent.
I remember reading. I'm going to look up to find out the status of it, because hopefully it hasn't been demolished. I'm going to look. I'm going to look that up because I should know that.
Yeah, according to John Doyle, who's a property developer himself, as well as a passionate boxing fan, an ex boxer himself, it's derelict and owned by one of the big Vegas real estate firms. He tells us. So John's usually
Okay.
correct with such things. But all right, the Petronellis gym in Brockton. You were close to those guys. No doubt you had a little cachet because of your bloodlines in that gym. And you got to spend a lot of time around the Petronellis and Marvin Hagler and the likes of Steve Collins and anybody else who went through the gym, right?
Yes, I did. And the Petronellis knew Rocky. They were close with Rocky, and Rocky was going to partner up with them. And he told Lou Duva that he was going to partner with him. And so it was a big disappointment when Rocky unfortunately met his untimely death, because it would have been a little easier for the Petronellis. But to be fair, Rocky was on the move so much, he would have been good to partner with, but as far as contributing to the day to day, wouldn't have been his forte. But he would have come in,
The
and
brand.
and and when he was in there, he would have made an impact. But the Petronellis were there every day, and they with Marvin, they were smart. They didn't believe in fighters taking a lot of punishment, especially a guy like Marvin. And they wanted Marvin to box. They didn't want Marvin getting hit too many times, because they're aware that, even fighters that don't get hit in the fights, the punches in the gym accumulate,
They do.
and the shelf life is only so long, and so they didn't want, Marvin just to go in there, and they weren't just going for the win. They wanted to get the win strategically, and they were hoping that that Marvin, got in and got out. Now, obviously, Marvin was a boxer and a banger, so
Yeah.
obviously, he had to bang, but they didn't just want him. They wanted him to bang when he had to bang. And they were aware of that, and they wanted him to be as smart and as technical as he could be, because they wanted him to be healthy. They hoped that he was going to be healthy at the end of his career.
Yeah. And he was, and obviously he passed away.
Well,
Passed
I
away
mean,
suddenly and
I
unexpectedly. But
yeah, I mean cognitively, we kind of take for granted the regular help, but they didn't want him to be,
yeah. I did,
cognitively impaired, and he
I
wasn't, and he
no, he wasn't.
wasn't.
I met Marvin in 2018, just briefly, but it was a priceless meeting for reasons I've gone into elsewhere, and I won't go into it today. But he wasn't best pleased with me because I'd gone to Milan on a mission to try and find him, and you said, I think you were the one who said, listen, if Marvin's not feeding you, and the chances are he isn't, then he doesn't want to know, because you obviously spoke with him before. But let's stay on Hagler. But I just want to fire back for the sake of inclusion. Bruce Guest, Boxing Jazz and More channel says, "Did you get to see your uncle doing the computer fight with Ali, and were the sparring sessions for real?" I think age-wise, timeline-wise, you wouldn't have seen that, but maybe you can shed some light on how serious those sparring sessions were when they were filming those scenes.
So there is a story. It is true. Rocky, there's a funny thing. If you watch Rocky in the muscular dystrophy,
Yeah,
with Jerry Lewis, Rocky doesn't know how to fake it. He's not too good, and he hits Jerry Lewis, and Jerry Lewis says, "Hey, this is for charity." Does he know? And so Rocky was
good
heavy-handed. Joe
impression.
Lewis said, "Yeah, yeah." Joe Lewis said, Rocky's the type of guy that he bumps into you and he just hurts you. He just
Yeah,
hurts you. And so, um, although obviously it was not two guys, in their prime, or meaning Rocky, and Ali
Ali was in exile.
was in exile, so he wasn't in his best shape either. But he was still younger than Rocky, obviously closer to prime than Rocky, or prime shape. So, but Rocky, anytime you get in there with Rocky, it's going to be rough and tumble. Now, were they supposed to go out 100%? No, but Rocky was wearing a hair piece,
Yeah,
and Ali was playing around one day, and he was poking at it with the left jab
yeah,
in the sparring session, and Rocky told him knock it off, and he didn't, and Rocky hit him with a series of body punches, and Ali went down to
yeah.
his knees, and Ali told Murray Warner, he says, "Man, I need more money for this," and he got more money. But so Rocky, Rocky was going to be heavy-handed, and they really did go at it. And Ali said, "Believe me, we were just supposed to be pretending, and I felt how this guy is, and if I feel him this heavy-handed in this type of setting, I know this guy's for real." And I'm glad they did it, because Ali, it gave Ali a perspective, because it's one
Yeah.
thing to see him, and I think Ali still respected him before that, he did,
I
but
think he did. Yeah,
when you get touched by Rocky, when you actually get touched by him, there is an appreciation. And so, no, obviously it wasn't a real fight, but Rocky doesn't know how to play. He doesn't know how to make believe. So, and I always say this, when a guy that's that has to get inside, once he works his way inside, he doesn't want to make it all for naught. He wants to let you know he's there. He wants to touch you, You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
He's not standing up on his back foot and jabbing from afar,
yeah.
as you know. And so once he does all that maneuvering that he needs to do to get in tight, he wants to let you know he got there. Bang. So he touched him. He touched him.
And you told me that he threw down a gauntlet to Sonny Liston once when he was obviously retired and Liston was active. I don't know if Liston was heavyweight champion of the world or not yet, but you told me one time he said he'd go get his kit and let's do it if that's what you want.
Liston was the champ. I'm trying to remember if it was. I think it was before the first fight. I'll find out. I should know that. And Rocky was asked, I forget what magazine, to go interview Sonny Liston, and Sonny didn't receive him very well. And not that Rocky was a diva and was expecting a marching band, but he didn't appreciate
The surliness.
listening. Yes, and I there was some exchange of words, and what Liston said, and Rocky said, I'll go get my gear. Let's go get our gear. Let's go do it. And Liston's camp thought better of it. But Rocky was fearless. Rocky, there's certain guys that don't have fear. Tyson fought with fear. Holyfield did not. Holyfield is the closest to Rocky in mental capacity, in personality, disposition, in
Yeah.
demeanor. Holyfield was the closest. Holyfield was not afraid.
Who
And Rocky was of that ilk.
who is your favorite fighter besides Rocky Marciano?
geez, that's tough to say. My favorite fighter, I loved Matthew Saad Muhammad.
Yeah,
Man, I used to feel the punches that he took. I loved him. I just loved him, and I felt bad for him. I wanted him to, even as a young man, I kind of wanted him to not get hit.
yeah,
So many Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard. I know as you are.
yeah.
I appreciate Leonard because he's a lot more than what he
The
than
perception.
people. Yeah, because he's too good looking. He's too cutesy. He's got that
That's what Mike
smile.
Tyson
But
said. He said he was a pit bull with a pretty face.
he's a tiger. He was a tiger. He was a finisher. Sugar Ray Leonard didn't want to just barely win a fight. You mentioned
Yeah,
Mayweather. Mayweather was satisfied with non-engagement. Sugar Ray Leonard was not. There was,
ruthless.
he was not. He was not a runner. He did run in the Hagler fight, but that's a
Yeah,
different story. But he was the pit bull.
yeah.
His fight against Hearns, in as far as the epic super fight goes, it was the biggest turnaround. It was the biggest in-fight
That's
adjustment of all time. He had no
180 degrees. That
he
is
had
my favorite fight of all time to this
he had
day.
no he had no business winning that fight. Leonard likes Rocky Marciano, and you know why? Because sometimes when guys seemingly have nothing in common, they have a lot in common. Because
Yeah,
he that was a that, and I'm only saying it was a Rocky Marciano performance is because Rocky came before him. But that's the fight that he's got no business winning. But he believes in himself. There were pockets in that fight that he thought he wasn't going to make it. I could see the look on his face. You could see it. I could see his demeanor, his
yeah.
body language, but he stuck with it, and he turned it around. That is one of
Greatness.
the most amazing fights, if not the, So who else? I guess for some reason I'm drawing a blank. There's probably, you know,
So we've got obviously Rocky Marciano. We have Duran, Leonard. I think Holyfield. I think you would probably add to the list. Matthew Saad Muhammad. What about Joe Frazier?
you
You must
know,
be a fan.
I, 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 um, I like Joe only for I shouldn't say only for I wasn't crazy about him. I don't see him to the level of my uncle. He was a threat from one side of the. I tell people I make the analogy of American baseball, and if you face a pitcher and he only has one pitch,
Yeah.
major leaguers are good hitters. They're going to catch up to him. Once you give them a second pitch, and if you give them a third pitch, they become effective. And in boxing, as you know, if you only have to worry about one side of the plate, that makes life a lot
So
easier.
you're talking
Joe,
about him just being a left hooker, strictly a left hooker.
yeah, I thought that, and I thought he did a lot of with what he had. I mean, they say Rocky did, and they act like Rocky was, overachieving. Rocky could damage you from both sides. Frazier couldn't, and Frazier wasn't really. I don't look him at as nowhere near as durable or strong as Rocky. He had high blood pressure even during his career. He had health issues. He's not a favorite fighter of mine, but for his heart, and because I knew he was overachieving, I totally respected him and I rooted for him. But he's not one of my favorites. But he great fighter. Don't get me wrong, great fighter. But and the left hook was a great. I love left hooks,
Yeah.
but he matched up well against Ali.
Yeah.
And it just
Um,
shows that, Ali, as talented as he was, the hardest fighter in the hardest style is a swarmer, is a swarmer that's coming in, that throws volume punches, that's a power puncher from both sides of the plate. Because a lot of swarmers and volume punchers, they're not powerful punchers. Like
Lamotta.
Vito Antuofermo is physically strong.
Yeah.
He's a volume puncher, physically strong, but he's not what I would consider
Power puncher.
a hard puncher.
No.
He's got a decent amount of knockouts, but I think it's misleading.
He's just
Because
overwhelming guys, breaking them down.
yeah, and against the elite class, so That type of fighter is, believe me, as you know, it's the most difficult, especially when that power is coming up. When it's coming up and under you and it's pushing you up, it's marginalizing your power and your strength. When it's at the same level, it's not quite as difficult to deal with. But when that power is coming up and it's hooking your armpits and it's
Yeah,
driving you up, and it's difficult to deal with. It's he wore down Archie Moore. Archie said it's impossible, and Archie Moore asked Rocky, "How were you hitting me?" And because I have my defense,
yeah.
the
Cross
shoulders
arm,
and the
cleverness.
cross arm, and Rocky was inventing punches on the fly. He was inventing punches and coming over the top and clubbing them. And so that's athleticism. And Archie Moore just said I couldn't get out of the way of it. And it was just he said he overwhelmed me. And Archie had how many, he's got more knockouts than anyone in the
Than anybody
game.
else. Well, you know what, Lewis? In recent, it was always said Archie Moore was the had the more knockouts than any other fighter in history. Then in recent years, there's supposedly this guy called Billy Bird from London who has more knockouts than Archie. He has something because Archie is credited as having, I think, 129 by BoxRec. Not that that's a holy grail source, by the way, but that's the one everybody refers to today globally. So Archie, I think, is set at either 129 or 131, depending who you listen to. But the old tally was 145. I'm aware of that, but they seem to have whittled it down. Billy Bird, on the other hand, I think has something like 138. I'd need to check that, but he has
But
130 odd.
but
But he didn't box anywhere near the same level as Archie. But Archie
I,
Moore's daughter, what's her name? Marie Moore, I think. She says that's
yeah.
nonsense, and it's her father, definitely her father, who has the record, and that we shouldn't believe BoxRec.
Well, if the other guy is a more obscure circuit, then
Yes,
then although listen, my father used to say, listen, if you beat 100, ladies that grandmas that put on a dress, I mean, it's not easy to
yeah,
get wins. But if the circuit and if the venue and the level was, it's still impressive. But the mainstream, what we call the mainstream
yeah.
boxing, I'm going to defer it. I'm going to say Archie Moore, unless it's you know what I mean. I'm not going to give the same
The
credibility.
technicality, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
let me see.
yeah.
Archie Moore is credited with having. I'll just check it now on BoxRec since I've got it in front of me. I've got. Um,
100.
It's I say that for some reason the computer's not reacting right now, which is exit page. Wait 1 second. It's funny how when you want something to work, it doesn't work. I've got a laptop here.
I know.
All right, let's have a look then. Let's try. It's like it's frozen or something. God knows what's going on. Maybe it's because I'm doing this stream, but I feel like finding out now about Archie Moore. It's become
Yeah,
like it's like the internet
it's
is so slow. I'm not used to that happening in this place. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. If it comes on, it comes on. But so do you? What was I going to ask? So that brought up to mind something else about that was of
oh, well,
relevance.
you were asked. Yeah.
Now there was something right on the tip of my tongue that was brought to mind by talking about Archie Moore and such. Um, Regardless, all right, let's try again.
Archie wasn't. They weren't giving him a chance at Rocky. They obviously Archie had to really toil for many years, as did a lot
Yeah,
of the African American fighters, and so he was proactive and he started a campaign, and he basically said Rocky was a chicken, but
yeah, yeah,
Rocky appreciated it, and he understood that Archie was a very smart, a very well-read, intelligent man who liked the arts and appreciated literature. And Rocky understood that this guy was again ahead of his time. He was
yeah,
being proactive. That's why at the end of the fight, you'll hear Rocky, and he says, Rocky didn't say too much into the fight, and what's his name? I forget his name. Bill Corum says, Rocky, what do you think of Archie? And he says, well, Bill, he says, Archie fought a heck of a fight. He says he wasn't kidding up there in North Adams, Mass. and that was the training
Yeah.
camp that he was in North Adams, and Archie was saying a lot of things, but he appreciated Archie. He wasn't insulted. I gather that Archie might have told him, "Hey, Rocky, I'm going to go on this campaign, and I'm going to,
Yeah,
shoot,
so
I'm going
don't
to
take
shoot
it
some,
personal. I just
yeah, I'm
need to
going
get
to,
some attention on us,
yeah."
And he was ahead of his time. Archie Moore was a fascinating character. Did you meet him?
I did, yeah. I met him, and his daughter is a beautiful lady. And I met them years. It's been many years ago. But he was quite a gracious guy, and he held nothing back. We're talking about, it's too funny because at the end of the fight, he says, "No, he's got a long way to go, but he'll be around." Little did he know that was Rocky was checking out.
His last fight. He actually did
He,
say that. I
he
found that,
says
that
that, yeah.
quote.
It's
He
just,
said, yeah,
well, because he was a lifer and he figured Rocky would be a lifer, but Rocky had a different business model.
mindset. Yeah.
Rocky had a different business model. He understood that boxing, he didn't want boxing to get the best out of him. And with his style, he knew that he was going to get in, make an impact. He was going to give 100% to every fight and get out. And fighters that fight as long as Archie Moore, Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali, they have peaks and valleys where they're not as inspired. Roberto Duran, where they're not as inspired, and Rocky didn't want to have a peak and a valley because he was trying to run the table. He was trying to win them all.
Yeah. For the
And
record, Billy Bird is credited with 139 knockouts, but Marie Moore says that her father actually has 145, and she doesn't give a damn what BoxRec says today. So
well, I'm going with her because she's a gracious, classy lady, and
she is.
I'm in her camp. I'm sorry, Billy.
Yeah. I've got to say, Lewis, you're a gracious, classy guy. It's been wonderful to get this opportunity to talk to you. And I don't think it should be the last occasion by any stretch of the imagination, because I don't actually feel we've hardly scratched the surface, although we've been on for an hour and 16, 17 minutes. So let's wrap it there. But we have very much, I'm sure the fans would very much like to see installment 2 before too long.
You see, that's why I like you, Ben, because there's not many people that want me to stay over an hour. So I'm going to come back anytime you want.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoy it, and
Yeah.
I appreciate coming on board with
My
you.
condolences to your father. I hope everything goes as well as it can do, and I will speak to you very soon. But thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.